you know, the 1970s call that wants its ad package back.
Welcome to the Truly Social podcast, recorded in Truly Social's office studio in downtown Toronto, where the neighborhoods have neighborhoods and where we reached peak brunch before it was cool.
Every 2 weeks, we deep dive into the topic of all things social. Unless you think that we're talking about social media, we are not. We come from the perspective that all things are social, or as I like to say, social is an approach, not a tool. We aim to tackle the subjects that connect people to people, people to brands, brands to brands, and bots to, well, everything. We're on a mission to get social back on track. And who the heck are we? Well, I'm Tara Hunt.
And I'm Carlos Pacheco, and this is
Truly Social.
So today we have Alistair Croll, who's a friend of ours, and I feel super honored that he came by the office. Alistair is a writer, speaker, startup accelerator, conference producer, currently knee-deep in Startup Fest prep. Also worked on BitNorth, Forward 50 Canada. He's a chair on O'Reilly Media's Strata Data Conference. He's written several books. The one that, introduced me to him was Lean Analytics, which I say with my very French accent, where I had the honor of being a case study in, and sort of had great conversations after that. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So we're doing this very sort of like, loosely and sort of talking a little bit of what, you're doing these days. What are you doing these days?
ADHD is a career, I guess. I certainly have, I've always had this attitude of like, what have I done for me lately? I live with this pathological fear that I should probably see a therapist about, that if I haven't done something interesting recently, no one's going to love me. So it's always like, what's new and exciting, right? God. I think a lot of people live with that.
Oh, yeah.
And like, yes. I realized, someone pointed out to me, my company, as much as it is literally called Solve for Interesting. So I may have like written my own diagnosis on the lid of my company. But no, I'm spending a lot of time, I guess at a very high level, thinking about what happens when the rubber of technology hits the road of humanity, because that's where all the interesting stuff is. And like in my early days as a networking, engineering, product management kind of person, that was pretty dry. Like you didn't really care about how a router affected your life or a network switch affected your life. But today, as we've moved up the stack through cloud computing into big data and artificial intelligence, now it's pretty clear how this stuff affects our lives. Mm. So it's naturally become much more philosophical than it was when I was thinking about, routers and switches.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Absolutely. And I think like one of the things that I've always loved about discussions with you, and we've had many over the years, is thinking about how technology affects human
I remember planting vines with you in Napa.
Oh my God.
And your hands were covered in dirt, and you looked at me at the end of the day. We went to a friend's place on the ridge between Napa and Sonoma. We planted 300 vines. The place survived the fires, by the way, and I'm told they now have bottles for us to drink.
Oh, we
so we have to go back there.
Yeah.
But I think I called you like at the last minute and said, let's go out of the city. And you came up to me at the end of the day and you're like, I needed to get dirt under my fingernails.
Yeah.
There's just something amazing about doing things with your hands that doesn't just involve typing,
Yeah, that was an amazing day. And we spend so much time, especially in our line of work, sitting behind screens, whether it's our laptops or our tablets or whatever other screens, phones. And we're connecting with people online. But that was like a very special day.
I think it's weird. I mean, your company is called Truly Social, and that's certainly something you've embodied for a long time. But when we look at social, we were talking earlier that if there's a typo in something, if someone spells your, Y-O-U-R, instead of Y-O-U apostrophe R-E, you immediately think less of them. And it could just be their iPhone auto-corrected it wrong, right?
Yeah,
but we look for these cues, and with data, we try to build this digital doppelganger of someone, and we think we know them. And the reality is that we may have come to the completely wrong conclusion about that person. And it's so hard to have that level of, we think data gives us a degree of intimacy with someone, but it just lets us hypothesize about what they care about and stuff.
Yeah, well, and I think like when it comes to data, we actually when we approach the data, we approach it with like a grain of salt, because it's one of those things that we understand that a lot of, because we look at social data, we sort of call it like digital anthropology, where we kind of sit, we're looking in the wild at what people are posting at any given time, and that says something about them. But we also know that it doesn't necessarily talk about their deepest, darkest desires and hopes and fears and dreams. It actually talks more to their aspirations, because people are generally posting to social what they want people to think about them, right? That's like, oh, I'm not going to post that picture on Instagram unless it makes me look really good. And
when Jane Goodall and Groot both went out and they sat with apes and chimps, they were widely criticized. They were like, how can you do this? You're becoming too biased. And so there's this debate with anthropologists, you know, the old sort of British colonial pith helmet anthropologists who would stand aside and say, oh, look at the tribes, how novel, right? And then as they became much more aware of that you needed to understand the culture and be part of the culture to make it, to explain what was going on, I think that's a really challenging thing for anybody that isn't genuine about its affinity with a tribe.
Yeah.
You know, we've gone from we're still, a lot of organizations are still in the pith helmet era. Let's study these natives and come up with conclusions that may be completely misinformed, right?
Yeah. Well, that's why like we call it data whispering and talk about reading between the lines of data. It's like, what are people not posting?
Yeah.
Right. Like, and you can only really see that when you look across various different swaths of audiences. And one of the sort of the biggest insights that we usually get is like when we're looking, the more audiences I study and the more like subcultures I study, the more that I see like patterns of absence that actually says a lot about
it's the taboo. Nobody wants to talk about it, but there's definitely something there. You know, there's a saying in data science, the plural of anecdote is not data. But I think nobody thinks about the corollary to that, which is the individual of data is not a person.
Right.
Right. Like it's hard to go the other way too.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. So Alistair has been like a hero of mine for many years on the way that he looks at data. Lean Analytics is great, but it's also, what was the original book from before Lean Analytics?
So I wrote a book called Complete Web Monitoring with Sean Power. And Complete Web Monitoring started out as so I had a company called Coradiant that did very deep web performance management. Yeah. And to explain it in plain, boring English, which took me like 6 years to figure out how to explain, web analytics shows you what people did. We would show you if they could do it.
Right.
And so if you're an e-commerce retailer trying to get conversions up by 2 or 3%, maybe people are getting 500 errors or the page is too slow. How would you even know, right? You never see it in the analytics. Again, it's to these gaps of what's not happening. Yeah. And so we built a product that would observe what users were experiencing when they came to the site in terms of performance and availability. And so I wrote this book with Sean about web monitoring, and I remember one morning going, oh crap, we have to write another third of a book. Because we had, while this book was about measuring your presence online, it was extremely web focused.
Right.
And we realized that more and more, and this is 2008, more and more of the conversation was happening not on your website, but on other websites. And so we wound up putting in this taxonomy of how to think about your presence on these weird nascent sites like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, and sort of delved into how do you measure impact. A lot of that. In fact, I remember a conversation with Heaton Shaw, and he's like, why'd you put this in a book? And I like, you don't like the book? He goes, no, you should have started that company. You'd be rich. You'd be on your yacht. Because we had these ideas about how to measure downstream influence and stuff that became the basis. I don't know if they got used, but there's certainly how companies like Clout would measure that stuff.
Well, boo to Heaton, because you could have probably still had a company, because we all know that, you know, people read books like that, like staccato, and go into the sections that they want to read, so you could still offer those services. That's right. But we love Heaton, don't. But anyways, one of the pieces of that book I remember was hugely influential to me, and I ended up using it when I did my startup, and then I also put it in several decks. Completely ripping you off, although I did credit you, was the idea of measuring along the customer journey. And that was like really influential to me. And I still, to this day, think about metrics in that way. Before that, you just think of like the metrics at the end, right? Like the conversions part. But now I know like that whole, like, I remember the questions that you asked, like the awareness part was like, have they heard of me?
Right.
And then the next one was like, when they're searching for you, right? And that's the...
Right. Okay. We called it the long funnel early on. And I know Dave McClure did a great job of explaining in his pirate metrics thing, this idea of like awareness and activation, the early on stuff. And then later on, you get into the currency, the hard numbers of referral revenue and retention. But early on, just trying to understand, if you know, how do people perceive you? Are they even interested in your product? So I wrote a post a while ago called something about writing a message map. Okay. And the idea was, if you're trying to sell a Honda Civic Hybrid, you don't start out by saying, want to buy my Honda Civic Hybrid? You start out by saying, are you a driver? Right. And if there's going to be a segment of the market that aren't drivers, they're too old to drive, they're too young to drive. So what do? Well, now your strategy might be, I'm going to sponsor driving schools so everyone's driving Honda Civic Hybrids, right? Or I'm going to run a campaign for grandparents saying, why not give the gift of driving to your grandchildren? And there's no point in having a conversation about you should buy a Honda Civic Hybrid until you've moved people through this message map that takes them from, you know, do you want to drive? Do you want to own a car? Mm-hmm. Do you want that car to be a hybrid? Mm-hmm. Do you want that hybrid to be Honda? And you got to lead people through it. And I think people, one of the risks that people have, especially in large enterprises, is they come in with this checklist of like, well, I know I need a press release, I know I need a white paper, I know I need a photo shoot. Like they got this, you know, checklist that is, you know, the 1970s call that wants its ad package back. Right. And there's no thought about one of the most amazing things. This just blows my mind every time I think about it. If you wanted to reach millions of people in the 70s or 80s, you would have to spend a ton of money on broadcast medium. There were a few networks to choose from. Super Bowl ads were expensive. We still pay for Super Bowl ads today, but there's a video on YouTube of a person opening plastic eggs for 10 minutes. It's literally a plastic egg. They open up like a Kinder egg. Yeah. And they take out the toy and they sort of wave it back and forth in front of the camera and they put it down and they go to the next one for 10 minutes. This video has 879 million views. Right. What's amazing is not how much it would once have cost to get something in front of 879 million people. That's a lot of money. Yeah. What's amazing is the person who made that video got paid to make it. It's not just that the cost of distributing is free. It's that we flip the model. Now, the more people you get to watch something, the more money you make, not the more money you pay. Yes. And for some reason, marketing and advertising in many, many disciplines has not realized that it's not just that the costs dropped, they flipped.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So last week, we talked about this when we went for brunch, that I was working on the presentation for
this is quite entertaining, by the way.
For the conference that I was speaking at, which was CTAM, the Communications and
Cable
and Television Association, or
Marketing
Association, of Canada.
I may have stalked your slides. They were awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I went, so I ended up...
last one of the day.
Yeah, they had me at the last one of the day, and all the speakers before me were great, but they were also very like, rah, broadcasting's gonna last forever. You're all good. You got this. And I got up and I was like pretty opposite on it. But anyways, you know, to that effect, I mean, we talked about a lot when we had breakfast about some of the examples that you had given. In fact, I put your slides at the end in the addendum, but I ended up just talking about, because I thought it was going to be enough, that I talked about the whole creator culture, right? And that, like, like with all of the people that doing all the studies, and to your points earlier on, like, which you're measuring, they're looking at this line, right? They're like, here's live TV, and it's like there's this decline in viewership in the hours viewed and the number of people who are subscribing to cable, and they know that, and that's a bit of a panic. But then they look at like what they call OTT, or over-the-top services, like Netflix, and they're just like a few degrees away from that live TV. They're like on-demand kind of television, right? They're the same thing. A lot of big production put into them, that sort of, and they're looking at that, and that's what they're looking at, and they're all dismissing this
user-generated
content stream, which when you put that on the map, especially with the younger 16 to 34 group, is ready in probably the next year or two to bypass the number of hours.
Look at Twitch. Right? There's a great example of like, I loved Clay Shirky's observation that people would say to him, where do they find the time to make Wikipedia? And he's like, that's the wrong question.
Yeah.
The amount of time it took to make Wikipedia up to 2010 is the amount of time Americans watch TV commercials in one weekend. The answer is not, where do we find the time? The answer is, where does the time go?
Yeah.
Like, how do we squander our time as a species when we could make that kind of thing? And I think, you know, casual games are the new television, right?
Yeah.
I mean, how many millions of hours each week are spent swiping candy?
Yeah.
That's a staggering number. And I think that as soon as you give people an easy way to create something, Twitch streaming was a good example of that, but as soon as you make it trivially easy for someone to do it, you know, the fact that the camera became part of the phone, everyone talks about Polaroid's big mistake and Kodak's big mistake. Their mistake was to realize that photos are for sharing. Right? As soon as you realize that, any technology related to sharing becomes strategic to you.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to, what do people want to do with this thing? And how do you make that unbelievably easy for them? And then you'll win, because then they'll become a creator for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, this is like when you're talking about like the amount of time people are spending playing Candy Crush or sharing, and watching videos on people unboxing toys or Twitch, all that stuff. The thing to note at the end of the day is, no matter what, our attention is finite. Mm-hmm. There is only 24 hours in a day, and we have to sleep for part of that. We have to eat for part of that. We have to like not
go to work.
Go to work, do all this other stuff, deal with life. So our attention is finite. Yep. And all of these other things that are coming in to grab our attention are taking away from, like you said, the ads that we watch on a weekend, or the shows that we were consuming on like live TV. I remember having to go home at a certain time because the show was going to be on, or
standing by the radio waiting to press record if that song came on again, because we're all old, right?
Yes.
But so my favorite author in this whole thing is this guy Herbert Simon, who coined the term the attention economy, and he said, you know, we don't live in an information economy because information is abundant and economies are dictated by what's scarce.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been thinking a lot lately about, how do you tell what's next? And one of the answers is to look at what's abundant and figure out what it consumes. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's abundant in today's world is data and algorithms. And when you have an abundant amount of data and you have powerful, almost free algorithms to chew on them, what does an algorithm consume? Well, the answer is kind of scary. Algorithms consume trust. When you really think about it, a human judge makes a decision. Now we abdicate to an algorithm. Is this person guilty? Should this person get welfare? Even in media, when we see what's happening with bots and advertising that's targeted and adaptive, there is a good argument to be made that if we were to make a sentient AI, like if we ever make an AI that's smart enough, it will be like the siren. It will say exactly what we want to hear, and it will bewitch us instantly, because it will be able to read our biometrics. It'll be able to read our galvanic response, our pulse, our pupillary dilation, and it will seem so seductive. We will be unable to resist. We will just want to love it. And it will be able to. So if you get to that point where you have this super intelligent being that just knows how to, it's like, you know, I'm sitting here with Lucy and Lucy loves me right now because I have all the scratches. But it will immediately beguile us. If that happens, even a pale shadow of that applied to robocalls, for example.
Right.
If you have the modern technology you're seeing today, where Google announced Google Duplex, which is where the computer calls up and sounds like a human, and it even says things and ah.
Yeah.
Imagine that it detects that the voice is female, so it uses a female voice. Imagine that as the conversation proceeds, it adjusts whether it swears or not. The tone of voice is deep or high, and it runs every call as an experiment.
Right.
And now you have a thing that is essentially optimizing to humans better than any human could, at scale, learning from every conversation, trying to get you to vote for a political party. Mm-hmm. That's a pretty dystopian Black Mirror world.
Right.
So what's the next resource? The next scarce resource. When that what does that consume? That consumes our trust. Right. And so I think that we're going to see, and we're certainly seeing technologies like blockchain that can provide distributed ways of authenticating. That's one of the reasons we need that technology. Humans are pretty good at inventing a thing right when we need it. We invented Google right when we needed it, right? But I think we're going to see this incredible currency of trust. And I know it sounds really hokey because there's so many like social media gurus like, oh, it's all about trust. But it's trust in a very different way. Right. It's trust in a veracity. You know, how do I know that's real? How do I know this is true? And I think that's actually going to lead to this incredible backlash against overly digital communications. We're going to really fall back to, I went to the store and talked to a person. Or like, I think it's going to be, you know, in the same way that when mass production gave us abundance, people said, I want the bespoke, custom-made thing that's of value. Right. And once upon a time, the rich had phones. Now the rich person is the person who has someone else to answer their phone. Right? Once upon a time, you were elite if you had a job. You were working class if you had a job, and you were elite if you didn't need to work, right? We talked about the idle rich and the working poor. Soon it's going to be, you have a job? Wow. What do you do that a computer can't do? That's fascinating. Yeah. And so I think we're seeing this weird reversal where trust is going to be a currency in a very real way, because we'll say, I don't want to deal with an algorithm. How do I, well, when you call me, you talk to an actual human. Today, I don't want to talk to humans. Give me a website. But I can see a world where people are like, no, I actually want to talk to you.
Well, it's also, you kind of see this a little bit in the handwritten note.
Right.
Right? Like when you get a card or when you get a handwritten letter or note, people are like, whoa, that person cares, and this really feels good.
Yeah, and I've sort of like scaled back the whole like just the basic stuff of like saying happy birthday on Facebook, right? Because Facebook's telling me to do it. I don't want to do it. What I'll do is I'll specifically message the person and say happy birthday, as opposed to, you know, the algorithm telling me how to do it.
Lenny Rachitsky did a talk at one of the first BitNorths on serendipity. And he said, and he was really ahead of his time in this thinking. He said, look, we're going to have algorithms that tell us what to do. And so an algorithm that says, you know, you have to get off the bus and walk because you haven't had enough steps to continue your insurance at the current coverage level. Right. And so what'll happen is algorithms will create the righteous path, the path that is insurable, the path that is healthy, the path that is decent and good, and all those other words. Right. And I did this Ignite talk on like, exactly. So I did this talk on like, in the future, only the very rich or the very poor, those who can afford to lose something or those who have nothing to lose, will take the path less trodden.
Right.
So that's a really weird, like the middle class kind of safe life will be doing what the algorithms say, because that's how you afford the insurance. That's how you stay healthy. But only those that have nothing to lose or those who can afford to lose. So I think the talk was called Tomorrow's Serendipities for the Rich.
Right.
This idea of serendipity is kind of weird.
You need to write science fiction.
Yeah.
Oh.
I tried writing some science fiction and it got really dark.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, isn't that the best science fiction?
It sounds Black Mirror, but yes. It's tough. There's a subreddit, I think, called White Mirror. Huh. And it's like people trying to say, no, let's talk about stories of technology for good. And it's actually kind of refreshing. You're like, huh. Like Fortnite is this, you know, Fortnite? Yeah. Fortnite is based on this Battle Royale game, right? And Battle Royale is a horrible movie in Japan.
I saw a specific video
explaining that one. Right? It's a movie that says the way to control kids is to take the worst behaved kids and make them kill one another. And yeah, we played Fortnite. Yeah. But what I loved was I read this story of a bunch of kids who got set up a Fortnite game. Everybody was allowed to play. You weren't allowed to kill anyone. And they built stuff together. Yeah. I'm like, it makes me feel maybe there's hope for humans after all if we turn off the guns and build stuff. That's kind of nice.
Yes. I mean, I feel like I don't know if, I mean, this takes us into the good and evil discussion, but the whole idea that, you know, do you believe that everyone is basically good, but so if left to their own devices will do good things? If given the right incentives and left to their own devices, will do good. Or do you think people are basically evil and need to have external controls guiding them from basically killing each other? Mm-hmm. Like isn't that like the classic debate, and that's what really I'm getting very philosophical.
Yeah, you are.
But it does, like, it's kind of
fun.
it divides it. That's what divides people's approaches to the world. So, like, you would say, like, the Republican kind of, not to get super political, but the Republican conservative kind of approach is more of the people can't be trusted, they need to be controlled, and the liberal is people are basically good. The liberal democratic people are basically good.
There's a lot of libertarians who would say that I'm conservative, and I think that you're coddling them. So I think my favorite author on this
and libertarians don't really fall into either camp very well.
My favorite author on this is Jonathan Haidt, who we've talked about before, who wrote The Righteous Mind. And if you haven't seen it, there's an amazing 20-minute TED Talk that, like, I've shown to senior members of political parties who said, I wish I'd seen this, a decade ago. So Haidt says that humans make decisions by what he calls moral reasoning, which is like, first you make a decision about something, and then afterwards you rationalize why you did it. Pretty scary, mostly very provably true. Daniel Kahneman in Thinking Fast and Slow alludes to some of this, although Haidt's research, he's less flamboyant and his stuff seems to have been better researched. And he says that most humans have a very few number of dimensions of their morality. Some of them include fairness, freedom from harm, tribal affinity, authority, and purity. And they're not left or right. So, like, if I say to you purity is a value, on the left that might be I don't vaccinate because I don't want to put, thimerosal in my body and other crazy things that are horrible. Horrible to not vaccinate. I don't want to say thimerosal is horrible. Or for example, I don't believe in premarital sex. Those are both expressions of this desire for purity, right? The best example I can think about what you just said is both sides say they believe in fairness. But on the political left, fairness tends to be equality.
Right.
We should all have education. We should all have healthcare. We should all have the same starting conditions. We would therefore support things like minimum wage and like affirmative action. On the right, fairness tends to manifest itself as equity. You get back what you put in. If you work harder, you're entitled to more compensation, right?
Meritocracy.
Right. And so, and both sides ignore, on the left, you might ignore that when I remember this picture of an Olympic gymnast and an Olympic swimmer. They're both gold medal winners, and one's like 6'2" and one's 4'0", right? Clearly, those two people were predisposed to be good at certain sports. And so this idea that everybody's equal ignores that. On the other hand, this idea of equity ignores things like systemic racism and disadvantage. And so the answers are really nuanced. And I think this question of good and evil comes down to everybody's convinced that they're good. But
we all are doing the right thing. I mean, even like the stuff that's happening in the US that we're like, I can't believe that decision was made. There's people that really believe that's the right decision to make. Like Thanos and killing 50% of the people to...
I had a conversation
that's
with...
spoilers, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
I had a conversation with
that's what his idea is. I didn't say he did it.
I had a conversation with my daughter yesterday, actually, and she's 7. And she's very into Baby Groot right now. So then, of course, he talked about Baby Groot's other teammates in the Guardians of the Galaxy, and Thanos came up. We talked a little about Thanos. And she goes, well, if he has a magic glove, spoiler alert, by the way, if he has a magic glove, then couldn't he make twice as many resources? And I said, well, yeah, but then people wouldn't learn their lesson. Like, they would continue to consume more and you have to keep doing it. She goes, well, then couldn't he snap his finger and say everybody only gets one kid until they get to half the population? And I'm like, you're going to go to politics. I think one of the interesting things about technology is it's giving us a petri dish like never before. In most cases, political discourse happened within our town and it was on a soapbox. And I think we now have the ability to, like, everything is an experiment and everything. Every time a politician says something, it's just a test balloon for what they actually think. And I think it took us thousands of years to get used to the idea of symbolic representation and math and language. Maybe 100 years for TV and radio. And, the iPhone's 10 years old. And we are just jungle surplus wetware going, what the hell just happened right now?
So just to wind back down to sort of like the stuff.
Reality.
Let's talk about philosophy and spoilers. Yeah.
I wanted sort of talk a little bit about the blog post, so you did, in the better definition of marketing, and also talk a little bit of what you're sort of like starting to think about in terms of, not starting to think about, but obviously, we live in an attention economy. Tara just presented and sort of said, like, your content doesn't matter. Attention is where it
that
matters,
was, by
right?
the way, the biggest point that like made jaws drop was when I said content is not valuable. They were like, what the F did you just say?
That's right.
I'm like, no. And I said, and audiences, they're not really even that valuable either.
Right.
What? Like eyeballs or whatever? I'm like, no. Attention.
There was an Adweek exec who just did a post on influencer marketing where he took a photo of his ass and he took a picture of his own butt. He pixelated it and he paid influencers to go and tell people about it and say it was great art. And he did a whole study on like what percentage of people would actually take the engagement and then what percentage would actually get someone to mention it. It was pretty scathing indictment.
Yeah. Well.
And also, like, your comment about, about marketers or brands, like, the story of like just being evil enough. Can you sort of explain where you're going with that?
Let's start with like, let's go back to the, can you describe the blog post first before we get into
Oh, sure. So I've been doing a lot of speaking for tech startups and working with accelerators. And I've probably heard pitches from, I don't know, by now 500 startups in my life, maybe 1,000, lots. And every one of them, almost to a T, talks about their product, how great it's going to be. They can rattle off their positioning statement. The Mad Libs, like for blank, blank is a blank, unlike blanket, blank.
Yeah.
Nowhere in there do they say, and here's how we're going to get people to do the thing we want them to do.
Right.
There's no way, like, here's how we're going to cost effectively capture the attention of our target market and get them to act in a way that lines up with our business model. They just fail to say it. And so I started looking, and the companies that did well found a way to get some target population to do a thing, usually in an unexpected manner. So if you're paying for ads, you're going to pay whatever the advertiser says. You don't want to pay the same price as everyone else. That's bad math, right? Because other people have more money than you. So the successful companies are those that find a way to get a system, medium, whatever, to do something it wasn't intended to do, because then they get a better return on their attention investment than everybody else.
Right.
To do that, you have to subvert the system. Subverting literally means to get something to do what it wasn't intended to do. And so
Find a loophole.
Right, some kind of exploit.
Growth hacking.
Right. And so, and I hate the term growth hacking, but
Really?
every hacker talks about exploits.
What was the title we were talking about for this? Growth hacking, which is?
So growth hacking is terrible.
No, but we had a sort of conversation planning.
Oh, so there's script kiddies and there's zero-day exploits in the hacking world, right? In the hacker world, you have these script kiddies who go out and they download a script and they run it. And if you didn't patch your WordPress, all of a sudden you're selling Viagra for them. And then you have zero-day exploits, which is where some city-state level organization, builds Stuxnet, and all of a sudden you're retarding the nuclear program of a country by 3 years. Like those are different, right? The difference is some people go and use an exploit and other people go and find an exploit. Yeah. I'm a fan of the people who are consumed by trying to find an exploit. Because in my experience, you can't just say, what did the winners do? You have to say, what did the losers fail to do? And in my experience, the losers failed to devote a lot of time to finding a way to subvert a system so it would do a thing that was unintended to their advantage. Yeah. That seems to be the big pattern across all the companies I've talked to.
What's an example of this?
So the best example I can use, which is an old one that everyone's heard of, if I say to you Tupperware, what do you say?
Parties.
Right.
Parties.
You don't think about plastic tubs, you think about the parties.
Yeah.
Tupperware took the dinner and turned it into an opportunity to guilt your friends into buying your stuff, right?
God, yes.
And now it's like, oh my God, yes, because now someone's already done that. So it's a known thing. And now you got, your neighbor's kid wants to have you over for dinner to sell you Cutco knives. But Once upon a time, that was revolutionary.
Yeah.
In the same, another example is, and I talk a lot about Netflix and Blockbuster. Netflix and Blockbuster both wanted to get in video streaming. In fact, everyone's forgotten that Netflix had the first streaming service before Blockbuster. Blockbuster had the first streaming service before Netflix did. So Blockbuster knew it was coming. Both Blockbuster and Netflix talked to analysts, and the analysts said, broadband's not going to be here for 5 or 6 years. And so Blockbuster executives went, oh, good. And Netflix executives went, oh, crap. Because Netflix was built on the idea that the future should be here sooner. And Blockbuster was built on the idea that they could milk the present as long as possible. And so Netflix pulled a brilliant move. They subverted the U.S. Postal Service. They turned it into a broadband network.
Right.
I mean, if you send a 4.6 gigabyte DVD over the post, it's still a 225 kilobit per second bandwidth connection. That's pretty fast for those days. They literally subverted the U.S. Postal Service, right?
Right.
And so, and I'll give you one third example, which is Farmville. Farmville launched on Facebook, and they realized that you could write an app that would post to your friends' feeds. Hey, Tara, Alistair needs some grain for his horse. Yeah. Really annoying. And within a couple of months, Facebook patched that. They made it no longer available. Farmville had 30 million users in a month. Yeah. So here's a case where they almost literally found a vulnerability, exploited it, and then the platform patched the vulnerability. So the trick is to find that new vulnerability, and you have to think subversively, you have to think like a hacker.
You could almost say that like the smart platforms, the ones that want to grow nowadays, leave it wide open so that people sort of find ways to sort of hack it.
Because people will.
You know, and people will, and they'll find a way to sort of build an audience or hack it, right? And
if you are a platform, if you're a platform that grows because your users take off, absolutely. Create ways for people to subvert it, right? If you're and this is one of the problems that traditional telecom has, for example, is that the moment that they allowed internet on their devices, like once upon a time, I used to be in the telecom industry, and there were phone companies that were going to sell you video conferencing and messaging and like tons of service. And then they added this one service called IP. And oops, you could do everything else over that, so nobody needed it. Just give me data. I don't even need my phone, right? And it was like they just let the market go away because so when you're a platform, if you're going to be open, you basically become a utility, and you have to behave like utility, which means you make low margins, very high volume. Everyone's going to use your thing.
Right.
If you try to behave like a brand that is differentiated and so on and gets people to use its stuff, while at the same time trying to be in a utility ecosystem, you have a fundamental disconnect. I mean, the number of people I know who are like, oh, I switched from, I'm not going to name a company, but they switched from big carrier A to big carrier B, but my email address was Alistair at big carrier A. And I'm like, you use your phone email address?
Yeah.
Why aren't you on like Gmail?
Yeah.
Right? So there's this weird disconnect, since you were talking to big carriers, there's this weird disconnect between I want to be a utility, a platform, I want everyone to do everything on me, but I want to sell you these branded services that lock you into just me. That's completely contradictory.
Yeah. What would your advice be to somebody that's starting, let's say, a consumer packaged goods company now? How can they be just evil enough?
So I think the first step is to figure out which target market is your hypothesis. If you're just starting out a new product, it's a hypothesis, right? You don't know if this thing is going to succeed or not. Right. You don't know who the real end user is going to be, but you have a hypothesis. And then you figure out how do I get that target audience's attention? And that comes from where do they hang out? What do they think about? What do they talk about? What messages are they likely to amplify? Who do they identify with? Who do they aspire to be? And then you look at that and you say, how can I capture the attention through the channel they normally do, but get the channel that they normally use to do something unintended? So if I have a medium of some kind, and Andrew Chen has this law of shitty click-through rates. Basically, over time, any platform trends to zero, right? If they are on a particular platform, what can you do to get that platform to behave in an unintended way? So the definition of marketing I think those people need to take away from this is Your job is to create attention you can turn into profitable demand. That's like my new working definition for marketing. Create attention you can turn into profitable demand. Anyone can create attention. I can go run on the street naked, plenty of attention, no profitable demand. I can also create attention that gets demand, but it's unprofitable. I can buy Super Bowl ads at top dollar, right?
Right.
It's that key. And I tend to draw this as 3 circles. There's attention, there's demand, and there's profit. So I would say to this consumer packaged goods organization, I love your product. I love your design. I love that. That's great. Now we're going to say, how can you capture attention? How can you do so in the most profitable way? And how can you be sure that that attention turns into the kind of demand you want? And if you're not looking at any marketing initiative through those 3 lenses, you are probably not you're not being sufficiently evil. One of the big lessons, I was talking to Paul Makapetras, who's the inventor of DNS, a couple of weeks ago. He's a great guy, very subversive, sort of been around forever. Really interesting person. Invented some of the fundamental ideas of the internet. He said, Alistair, what you're really talking about is a means to an end ratio. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, everybody has a different means to end. Some people have any means necessary to justify my ends. Other people are like, I'm a good person and I would never do those things. And he said, in a lot of cases, you have to decide what your means to end ratio is. Many of the companies that we hear about that are famous today, like the Netflix and the Airbnbs of the world, did something late in the game out of desperation that made them successful. If you look at the history of those companies, they did something that was like desperate. Why aren't you doing the thing you are most likely, why aren't you doing the highest means to end thing first? Like, why aren't you doing that up front? I mean, you're going to get there eventually.
Yeah.
Why don't you do it first?
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I'm trying to encourage people to do, is to say, look, play a mind game. If you were evil, what would you do? Now walk it back to what you're willing to do. Right? Because we talk about brainstorming, let yourself be evil. What would Dr. Evil do? Well, maybe not Dr. Evil because he's an idiot, but let yourself be evil and then say, okay, now take out the parts that are evil, and what you're left with is subversiveness. And if you can make it subversive, it's good.
Bad horse. What would Bad Horse do?
I have no idea what Bad Horse is.
Oh, come on. He's the thoroughbred of sin. I'm not going to start singing. Yeah, it's Dr. Evil sing-along.
Oh my God.
Okay, Bad Horse. I'm going to start singing. Okay. But yeah, that's a good question. What would Bad Horse do? I need a WWBHD.
Yeah. What would Bad Horse
but that is the question, is like, we don't spend enough time thinking about how to subvert a system. And what you'll find is many of the things we do today, the landscape is changing so much. Being evil is a matter of judging whether the outcomes, we talked earlier, everyone thinks they're a good person. The question is, have you found a mechanism that's unreasonably effective at capturing attention that you can turn into profitable demand? If you're a jerk, you won't be able to turn it into profitable demand, right?
Right. Well, the one thing though, I would, thinking this all the way through, isn't there like a point of saturation on this where everybody is thinking about subverting the system, and then we get to this, back to the trust part where it's almost like peeing in a public pool, right? Like it's you ruin I find
you've definitely poisoned the well of marketing, but I'm optimistic. And here's why. I think this takes us back to an era of marketing creativity. Yeah. My uncle ran Leo Burnett for Southeast Asia. He was a brilliant ad executive. He told me that someone came to him who had the distribution for True Form bras, which I'm told are like a fancy bra brand, or at least they were back in the Mad Men era of Singapore. This guy had a license for Australian True Form bras to sell them in Singapore. And my uncle said, I will take you as a client. He was like head of Leo Burnett for Asia Pacific, big guy. He said, I'll take you as a client on one condition, which is that you do exactly what I say. The guy says, okay. He says, first thing, I want to spend half your money on a one double-sized newspaper ad. The guy's like, that's half my budget, because you said you were going to do what I said. So what he does, he says, second thing is, you've got exclusive distribution. I want you to only sign up 2 distributors. These 2 stores, they are the most respected stores in Singapore. For a month, they're the only people that are allowed to sell it. The guy's like, this is awful. I'm going to spend all my money on one ad, and I'm going to sign up 2 stores instead of all of Singapore. When everybody wants this product, my uncle's like, take it or leave it. You're going to go. And the guy says, okay. My uncle takes out a 2-page ad, middle of the newspaper. It just says, burn your bra. true form is here. Massive letters. This is in the middle of like Woodstock, right? Burn your bra. True form is here. It's scandalous for Singapore. And then he hires he gets all of his Leo Burnett people, and he has them stand outside the 2 big retail outlets with big barrels in which he's put dry ice and red lights, and they drape bras. And every woman that walks in, he goes, "Can I take that for you? Are you here to give me your bra? You're going to burn that, aren't you?" Like, just interrupts people and says, "Obviously you're here to burn your bra. Please put it in the burn barrel." 100% market share, just done. Within a month, everybody's covering it. The guy knocked out of the park. Was that subversive? He found a way to turn the entrance to the store into a promotional vehicle, right? That's interesting. Yeah. So that's a subversion.
Yeah.
What's something about that target market? You got to go into 2 doors to go buy these things because those are the stores are. What are you going to do to subvert that? Well, I'm going to find a way to interrupt every woman because I can see my target market. They're pretty easily identifiable. And I'm going to interrupt her and tell her individually about this product. Right. So he subverted, his channel was literally the entrance to the store, and he subverted that, right?
Right.
I think, I'm actually optimistic that it gives us license to be creative again.
Okay. Yeah, I think for me, like I see and maybe these people are doing the part like that goes, they're subverting, but they're being the jerks. So I see people that take advantage of loopholes, like on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. I think I sent you this particular example where people are like tagging like 1 million people on LinkedIn.
There's that. They're putting a lot of like video content that's not there.
Yeah, and
by the time it's a known hack, it's not that usful. Yeah, right. Because it will immediately fall victim to Andrew Chen's law of shitty click-through rates. Yeah,
yeah. Well, and it's also like kind of making LinkedIn itself not as valuable of a platform. These annoying things are making me want to spend less time.
And there's an arms race there, and LinkedIn, especially. I have Facebook running in like basically I put it in a cage and it can come out when it's well behaved, but I have it running in a Firefox, lockdown browser virtual mode. It has definitely, it's moved on. I find running conferences, I used to email people. Now I just text them on WhatsApp, and it's a 5-second conversation. You want to come? Yep. When is it? Okay, I'm there. Good. Mm-hmm. But WhatsApp, I know them, they know me. We've already shared credentials, So I think that's why I think that the trust is, how many of your target customers can you WhatsApp is a pretty interesting.
That's like everything you've sort of been saying so far it's just reminds me of like social media. It's like as a whole, and the platforms, how everybody's been just, the social media gurus have been like hacking them for the past, 10 years. And now they're basically closed down. Like you can hardly hack them. And then all us marketers are starting to think, okay, well, why don't you think about email lists? Why aren't you focused on email lists and all that sort of stuff? It's over the last, 10 years, our focus has been taken away from the real personal relationships back to these surface level, what I call surface level sort of relationships that, I like, what's a like, and there was a value to it once. It maybe was valuable for a few minutes, but it's been gone forever. It's just that we're constantly sort of finding, going after the next, the next achievement on the platform, right? How many followers you get. It's a little bit of how we sort of try to, scale back a little bit of how we, advise our clients. Is sort of like, don't think about the number of followers, think about the quality, think about, all that sort of stuff that, the person that's actually engaging with you and actually wanting to give you their email address or their phone number. And all that sort of stuff. Right?
And really, the lenses are, if there's a rate at which you can capture attention, right? Like there's a going rate per eyeball or per click or per whatever. Yeah. How do you get a better rate than everyone else? How do you get a better deal? And in many cases, you have to find a way to subvert what the platform was intended to do. Yeah. And then you have to have a very clear way to convert that attention into demand, which a lot of people forget. Like, just because you know about it, how do you then turn it? And then that demand has to be profitable, which means you have to have a sustainable, repeatable business model behind it, right? And so those 3 things, a lot of times people do something that creates attention. I'll give you a great example of subverting a network that was totally evil, but brilliant. Remember Coney 2012?
Oh, yeah. We were at South by Southwest.
So what Coney did that got all the growth, and I've literally been collecting stories like this for the last little while, so maybe my view of the milk of human kindness is soured. What Coney did is they would say, hey, Carlos, please tweet this thing. And you'd go, this is horrible. And then when they shared the tweet, it would be, "This is horrible" at Bill Gates. They'd append the name of a famous person from a list of 100 people. And eventually, if you're a Bill Gates social media manager, you're like, 4,000 people mentioned me, and they all see, oh, what's this? And one of those famous people is going to click it. All of a sudden, you have famous people endorsing it. That worked for them. After that, everyone's like, now when someone does that, when someone tweets and mentions me randomly, I immediately go look at them and I can see in alphabetical order all the other people in that list. And I'm like, okay, I know what you're doing. But it worked then. Right? They found a way to get a much better return on Twitter investment by hacking it. Now, you may not want to do that, but you have to say to yourself, what would I do? What would I do if there were a gun held to my head? Because backing away from what you would do if there were a gun to your head will show you what's possible. And we are not thinking subversively enough. We are competing on attention, but we're still writing press releases. And every time we write a press release, we create more information, which is the opposite of what we should be doing. We should be trying to find ways to capture attention, not create information.
Awesome.
All right, a good way to end it. Exactly. So, as usual with every show, we talk about our truly social heroes, people who inspire us, who are doing something awesome online, educating us, or just entertaining us. As our guest, I'll leave it up to you to sort of say who's catching your attention.
Sure. So I'm going to name two because it's cheating, but I'll make it quick. I've been very involved in this digital government conference called Forward 50 we launched last year. And I've come across a number of outstanding people. One Canadian hero, one in the UK, but global. The Canadian hero is a woman named Maayan Ziv, Maayan Ziv. She's a photographer, and she has been challenging accessibility, and she's done a great job. She's actually got a company called Access Now that shows people where things are and how accessible they are. So I think of it as a Google Maps overlay for accessibility. And it's a really good example of taking something everyone's familiar with and using it to reinforce or add a layer of cognition that you might not be aware of. You look at, can you go to a place? You wouldn't know if it was wheelchair accessible, for example. Right. As soon as you take something people are familiar with, like Google Maps, and you overlay a platform like Access Now on it, you can immediately see it. So I think she's done a very good job of taking something that you or I probably don't think, oh, that curb on the sidewalk has a bump on it. We can't get up that. We don't think, we just walk across it, right? But putting this layer of cognition on top of it is amazing. So she's done some really good work. She's a great entrepreneur, also an amazing photographer, Maayan Ziv. And the other person is a dame. Her name is Martha Lane Fox. I was lucky enough to see her speak at Strata in London recently. And she has an organization called .Everyone. And they are all about digital accessibility. And one of her underlying tenets is that, and she was one of the founders of a bunch of .com companies and also the UK digital service, as one does, right? Amazing woman. One of the most electric speakers I've ever seen. .Everyone is an organization I think is going to take off in the next year. One of the things they talk a lot about is we teach home economics so people can pay taxes. And we teach, civics so people can vote. We're going to need to start teaching technical literacy so people can live their second online life effectively. And I think that the rise of digital literacy makes populations resilient, makes us more immune to fake news, that kind of stuff. So Dame Martha Lane Fox, who is the founder of an organization called .Everyone. I think they're both doing amazing things. And if I had to guess, I would say that in this year, you're going to hear a lot more about those two organizations.
Awesome.
Definitely pay attention to them.
In the show notes.
Yes.
Who are yours?
I have one, and he isn't as sort of like world bending as as people sort of mention. It's somebody that I've yet to meet, but Tara knows very well. Actually, it's Stuart Bertlestar. And
you haven't met Stuart?
No, we haven't met. And he's sort of this local sort of like, he's an influencer, right? But he's not your typical 17-year-old influencer. He's actually our age, right? And he's sort of
middle-aged dad.
A middle-aged dad that just, has sort of like jumped on every platform and just plays the game so well. And just like, he doesn't have 1 million followers, but he has, 100,000 here or 50,000 there on social media. And, he's created about a year ago when Facebook did Facebook video, he started creating like a live TV show with him and his wife every morning, sort of like the morning show. And I'm like, that's amazing that you're doing this. You're doing exactly what a full-on production TV show should be doing that they're not doing. And you're doing it in
it's funny too.
And it's funny, right?
He started out, I think, on, I think it started
Vine.
on,
He was
he was on Vine, but I think that show started out on Periscope.
Oh, yes.
Periscope's gone, so he's doing the Facebook.
And, he came back into my radar last week with like, VidCon and all that sort of stuff. And I'm just constantly amazed at how well he sort of navigates the space. He's very smarter, obviously, because he's older and sort of gets it. He sort of like really uses his all the platforms to get the attention. And he's able to make a living without having, 5 million subscribers. And he's sort of really good at sort of like playing the system to sort of do that. And I think it's amazing to see that, you don't need 5 million people to follow you if you have a strategy behind your sort of messaging and all that sort of stuff to make a sustainable business out of yourself, right? And that's something that we try to sort of tell our clients, or even, I constantly get approached by, YouTubers who want to be YouTubers. And I'm like, don't worry about don't try to be, 5 million followers. It's like, find something that people want to hire you for or want you to do, as opposed to like just watching your videos, right? That's a lot of in line with what
I think that idea, if you've picked a smaller niche, it's much more likely to believe you are trustworthy in that niche. So it comes down to the whole trust equation thing of the more focused you are, the more likely it is you're a trusted authority.
Exactly.
Yeah. And mine's another podcast that we've loved for a while. It's called The Secret Life of Canada. The women behind it, Leah Simone Bowen and Fallon Johnson and Katie Jensen, are hilarious. If you wanted to describe it, it's basically Fallon, Leah Simone, and Katie ruin Canada for you.
That's a great way to describe it.
So they basically take everything that you love in Canada and talk about its sordid history and how Canadians are actually the biggest assholes ever. Yeah, so from like
we're just not evil enough.
Well, we're evil, but we're evil in this way that like we've buried obviously this history. So that's actually a bad evil, right? Like it's like if you're gonna be evil, you got to own it. In this case, it's not so much, but it's a really entertaining podcast. I find like their research is so amazing, and they're funny, and they have a lot of fun. Like I don't know. I feel like they're like kicking back with a glass of wine and just having a good time, like talking about these topics. Great storytellers. It made me want to follow them personally. And, I definitely, someday want to meet them. So Secret Life of Canada, great podcast. Eye-opening for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Alistair.
Thanks for having me. This is great. I haven't done a podcast with 2 dogs here. Those of you that can't see what we're doing, there's like a giant pile of dog hair here.
Oh my God.
But they're awesome. Definitely.
Yeah, we need to go get the Dyson now.
Good studio.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
We really hope you enjoyed this week's topic.
If you did enjoy it, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at @TrulySocial, @MissRogue, GUE, and or at Carlos Pacheco, that's CarlosPache_CO, with your own insights. If you did not enjoy it, tell us why too. We do love feedback. And if you want to argue one of our points, bring it.
Also, please go over to iTunes or whatever podcatcher you use and give us a rating and review, and pass this along to anyone you think would enjoy it.
We're also looking for guests to join us in future conversations. So if you have something you'd like to discuss or an alternative viewpoint you want to challenge us with, please do drop us a line. You can tweet us or email us at podcast@trulysocial.ca.
Until next time,
TTYS.